going to introduce someone that defies introduction, because you know her a whole lot better than I do. But today we're going to hear some stories from Patty Louise, things about Hockeyville and items about our downtown revitalization initiative. I don't really believe that Patty needs more of an introduction, because look how she was welcomed by all of our guests today. So let's hear it from Patty.
All right, I'm going to turn this on even though I'm loud. Okay, now I'm going to be even louder, I hope. So thank you for coming out. Anyone who came from Waterville knows we're getting squalls and whiteouts and not quite the weather that we're looking at here, so yay. Before I start, I just want to go on record, as we're being taped, that when the Buffalo Bills realized that they were up against the Clinton Historical Society league, they moved their game. At our house, we're Steelers fans, so there was no chance my husband was coming to this. But then when the game got moved, he was doing something else, and but I was like, oh, okay, that's great. So thank you, Buffalo, for realizing which was the better event today. So Don locked me into this months ago, but up until about a year ago, I was still, or just a year ago, a month ago, I'm like, what am I really going to talk about? I'm going to narrow it down. There's so much we could talk about. And I'll tell you a quick story on how I arrived at this. I was listening to a podcast, and it said if you had a live Christmas tree, after Christmas you should put it in your yard, so it would be a home for little animals and such. And it reminded me of a story that my grandmother, long gone, had told us when we were kids. My dad was the oldest of 4 boys. So the stories that came out of her were hilarious. And one time, when the boys were young, after Christmas, they went and they had this great idea with their friends to collect all the Christmas trees and build forts in their yard. His 2 youngest brothers are my two uncles, John and Al, were the twins. And at some point, everybody got called into dinner, except my grandmother looked around and the twins weren't there. She said, well, where's John and Al? And my father and his brother were like, oh, they must still be outside. So my grandmother tells the story, going out there in her house coat and her slippers, looking for these almost 3-year-old twins, and realizing there were about 30 Christmas trees in her backyard. And she's frantically throwing them around, trying to find them. Well, the boys had gone to sleep. They were at the bottom. And they had fallen asleep. They were warm. So when I heard that story, and it reminded me of that, my cousins and I are on a group text. And I told them the story. I said, oh, this reminded me of what Grandma said, about this. My cousins, I'm the oldest, so my cousins are all younger, and they didn't know the story. So they said, oh, that's great, thanks, and they told their kids and told people. And I realized that there were stories that I knew, that now I had shared that story that was now going to be kind of rippled out amongst us and maybe not forgotten. So when I thought about it for here, I've been in the fortunate position of being involved in both Hockeyville and the Downtown Revitalization Initiative grant, and know some stories that haven't always come to light in our official proceedings. So I thought, what a great audience to share some of these, and hopefully you'll go out and tell these stories, and years from now people are going to say, oh, I heard this story once, don't know if it's true, but here's what I heard. So these are mostly true, no, they're all true. So Hockeyville, right? 2018, I'm going to say probably the single greatest year ever in this village's history. Okay? And we were not just the first New York State team to win it, we were the first New York State team to win the Final Four, to get into the Final Four. And it all stemmed, of course, from, thank you, at Albert Prettyman weekend, when Andy Burns decided that a guy who flooded a tennis court should be recognized for starting hockey. And we had that great weekend, and if you participated, you know that the stories were just flowing. And from there, well, even before that, Andy saw this vision of Hockeyville, which I didn't even know what it was, but, he said, this is our year, we gotta corral these stories, we gotta do this. So we did. We took that success from the TYAP weekend, and we got Stan Fischler's endorsement of Clinton being a great hockey town. We had the Albert Prettyman freezing tennis court to start hockey. We have the wonderful story of how the first Clinton Arena burned down, and then people didn't care too much about codes or anything, just rebuilt it on their own. So we had a great momentum. And of course, you're going up against hundreds, thousands of other communities, and you just don't know. And we win, of course. And if you were in the arena that April Saturday when the announcement was made, it still gives me goosebumps to think about. So when you win, of course, you get so much. And these 4 fabulous days in September of 2018, right? When the NHL is going to come here, when hockey greats are going to come here, when everything's just going to stop and say, we're celebrating hockey here. And when I look back on it, I wouldn't change a thing. The one day we needed good weather for the outdoors, we had good weather. The rest of the days were a little iffy. Okay? And we were able to celebrate everything from our Clinton youth to the Clinton Comets. Okay? And one of the things that I learned from there, and I looked, my non-disclosure clause ended last year, so we can say this. You went to vote. So fact one, we kept saying, well, how many votes did we get? Andy in particular was kind of pushing to get the votes. And they say, we don't disclose the number. But there was a dinner. There may have been adult beverages involved. And finally, one of the NHL craft people said, well, we're just going to tell you this. You got more votes than any community ever did. Okay? So, great. So, here are some things that I think help make that. Some stories that you might not or not know. Clinton hospitality is the best. Okay? We heard the announcement on a Saturday. On Sunday, the very next day, I don't think it was 24 hours, Andy and I, who kind of became the de facto chairman of this, get a call from the NHL and Kraft. And I'm sitting at home going, oh my gosh, someone from the NHL is calling me. Like, this is so great. And they said, we're coming to visit Thursday. Like, this Thursday? The one coming up? And they're like, yeah. And they said, we want to look at your rink, we want to do a tour, and then we want to meet with your local committee. We didn't actually have a local committee yet, but we were going to get one real quick. So, when I talk about hospitality, when Andy and I conferred on the phone that Sunday night, he said, these people are giving us $150,000. They're bringing the NHL here. We should treat them to dinner. I mean, that just seemed logical to us. So when I spoke with someone at their end, I said, well, we have this restaurant, Altieri's, and we were a little worried. They're coming from Chicago and New York. And it's not fancy, but it's great food. And I said, even though you're coming from Chicago and New York, it's the best pizza you're ever going to have. And they're like, well, we'll see about that. But they were what they said, and I said, and you'll be our guests. And I never forget, his name was Alex Cabot, and there was this long pause on the phone, and I thought, oh my gosh, did I misstep here? I don't know the protocol, how to deal with it, And he said, no one's ever treated us to dinner before. Wow. And so not only we were the 4th in the United States to win, but Canada had been doing it for 12 years previously. And I said, no one? He goes, no, because that's so great. So I'm like, wonderful. So it was very casual. It was a great night. They were mostly people in their 20s, early 30s, who after they got done with us were going to go back to their hotel and watch hockey. And so I said to Fran, we'll make a little extra so the kids, as we called them, could take some back. And we walked out of that back room friends. Okay. So the other thing that we did that we didn't know was unusual was when they said they wanted to take a tour, we called Steve Hale and said, could you provide a bus? We'll be on a bus for this tour. And he said, not only will I provide the bus, I'll drive it. So right before dinner, we met for the tour. And we had collected our group, and we'd said to everybody, just mingle with them. You know, let's not all clump together, and they clump together. And I was walking with someone from the NHL, and she said, never had a tour bus do this before. I, somewhat sarcastic person that I am, said, what'd y'all do, just get in your cars and follow people? And she looked at me and said, yes. Oh. I said, well, the bus seemed logical. We were just happy it wasn't a school bus. So we got on there and we had a tour, and it was a lot of fun. And from that first day, you know, I think that we kind of established that Clinton was going to do things a little differently. And second story, the stories you might not know, I sort of entitled, The Burns Brothers Know How to Get It Done. Okay. Working with Andy Burns was a once-in-a-lifetime treat. Andy had a vision. You know, the rest of us are like, oh, this is good. He's like 6 steps ahead. But you can't mistake that for that fact that the guy knew his details. And there's so much that I can say about working with him. The phone calls, the stuff that we did, you know, trying to, you know, cheer each other up when it was like, oh my gosh, we're never gonna get done with this. But there's a story I want to share that I think just encapsulates how much Andy put into this to the detail. So Stan Fischler, hockey great historian, right, acknowledged hockey historian, had written an essay for us. And unfortunately, he could not make the celebration, the 4-day weekend. He had travel plans he had committed to. So Andy wanted to get a video. And from April through mid-September, twice a week, Andy and I were part of conference calls with the NHL and Kraft. And from about May, when we realized Stan Fischler couldn't make it, Andy kept saying, we need to get a video of him. We need to get him on video. And I'm not saying they were rude, or there were so many other things, like, yeah, we'll get to it. And then we got to one, and I'm pretty sure it was somewhere around late July. And it had kind of become a joke. Like, that was how Andy ended every call. Anything else, you guys? I just want to know where you are with the Fischler thing. We haven't gotten to it. So we get to this call in July, end of July, and they do anything else? And no. And so somebody says, hey, Andy, what about Fischler? And he goes, oh, don't worry about it. I took care of it. We're on the phone. I could just feel the tension coming through the wires. Right? He says, what do you mean you took care of it? He goes, well, I called NBC. They're sending a camera crew over today. Okay. So Andy's idea wasn't just to get Stan Fischler, which is why I think this is such an awesome story. Because Fischler couldn't make it, and our guest speaker was Jeremy Roenick, Andy wanted the video with Fischler to end introducing Jeremy Roenick at the gala. And so it was, if you were at the gala, it was amazing. So there's Fischler up on the big screen, and he's talking about Clinton and a wonderful hockey town it is, and how he deserved this. And then he says, as if he's in the room, and now I want to introduce NHL great, Jeremy Roenick, and he talks a little bit about him. And Roenick gets up, and there you go. And Andy spent literally hours on what was a 3-minute segment of a 4-day weekend, and it just was perfect. So part of our committee, one of our committee members was his brother Dave. And Dave was not the pushy, kind of out front guy that Andy was. And we didn't know, you know, we look back now and we think, oh, of course it happened. But when they first came to the arena, we were like, they're not going to have the game here. It's not very nice. They're going to do it at the Nexus Center. But we knew that no matter where they played this, we weren't going to have enough tickets, right, of everyone who wanted to come. So they made the decision at the arena. And quick side story. So Dave and I we're probably both nice people. And Andy was in North Carolina when they made the visit that Thursday, and he's like, find out what they're saying. So Dave and I are trying to sidle over, and they move, and I'm like, well, we're not gonna. So I said, I don't know, they're gonna go look at Utica. And he goes, you gotta mention the crime rate down there. I did, during the dinner, say to one of them, they said, well, you know, it's a nice arena. I said, and they're so lucky the police station is right next door. But I think part of it, we convinced them our charm and to have it at the arena. And we kept talking about the tradition of standing at the rails. And the NHL and Kraft goes, nobody's standing at this game. No one's going to stand for a whole game. We're like, no, they will. No, they won't. They will. And we were getting down to where they had to, each seat in the arena had its own letter and number. And so they were getting down to where they were going to start making the tickets. And we kept saying, we need standing room. And in our private meetings, Dave kept going, we need this standing room. You know, people are going to stand. And I'm like, I don't know, Dave, we're not making it. We're not getting through to them. So we had the last meeting, they were going over the tickets, like what they were going to do. And they said, so we brought up the standing room and they said, no, people are not going to stand for an entire hockey game. And so Dave just looked up quietly and said, okay, but those empty seats on television are going to look really bad. Hand to God, that's all he said. And then he just went back to look at his piece of paper. And there was this silence in the room. And they're like, oh, okay. That afternoon, people from the NHL were standing by the rails, standing so they could mark out spaces. So standing space A23, 24, 25. And that's all he had said. And it upped, I think there were 300 more tickets on there. And, you know, I think that when I, you know, we look at the game and, you know, you look around and the people were standing up there, that was Clinton. Right? So number 3 with Hockeyville that you might not know is we rewrote the book on how it was done. Okay? One, we kept saying we need more merchandise, and Patty Maxim was in charge of that. And no sooner would boxes come in and Patty would organize them and say, put out on Facebook, we have more stuff, than it would be empty. And they kept going, well, no one's ever sold that kind of merchandise before. We do. But the thing one of the things I'm really proud about is from the very beginning, we knew that not everyone would get into the arena for the game. But for us, it was really important for the kids. And we said, you know, this is the biggest thing that's probably going to hit their hometown. And kids need to be part of things. So we said on the practice day, the practice that morning of the game, we want the entire school to be there. And Steve Graham, who was one of our committee members, and the Board of Education were right on target with that. They're like, absolutely. You know, yeah, it's 2 weeks into the school, so we're going to take a snow day. You know, we're going to do this. And the NHL and Kraft kept saying, it won't work. Kids aren't going to sit still that long. They're not going to be interested. Not every kid likes hockey. And we said, it's not about the hockey. It's about the event. It's about the kids are going to be part of something. And we really hung tough on that. They kept saying no, and we kept saying, no, this is going to happen. And they finally said, all right, you know, I said, every kid, from whether they're in kindergarten or 12th grade, they're going to go out there and they're going to say to the world, I saw NHL players on my home arena. They may not like hockey, but they're going to be part of this. It was a smashing success. So not only did Kraft, you know, we went to Kraft and said, well, the kids are going to be here during their lunch hour. And Kraft said, how many Lunchables do you need? And I still remember the older kids, the seniors and juniors, standing up on chairs sort of going, okay, who wants ham and cheese? And like throwing them out to the littler kids there. The kids were very involved. They were well behaved. There was no trouble there. But what really did it was the players from both Columbus and Buffalo said, best warm-up we've ever been part of. The kids were right into it. They were interacting with the kids from the get-go. So of course, at that point, you know, it was clear from the first, it was a success and it was working. And I remember going up to one of our NHL people, who by now we were friends enough where I could say, I told you so. We told you. And they said, yeah. And he said, he was on his phone and he said, I'm sending a note to my boss that says, every Hockeyville has to do this from now on. And the next year, when Calumet, Michigan won, I got to go there to help present the trophy, and all their kids came. They did like ours. They walked down, and one of the women there said, "I understand we have Clinton to thank for this." And I said, "You wait till you see it." And they all went in there, and it was. She said, "This was perfect." You know, and it was something they might not have thought about. So, Calumet was number 5 in 2019. 2020, we all know what happened. As Hockeyville was starting to go with their competition, the pandemic hit. They put it off, and finally in 2021, they awarded Hockeyville to El Paso, Texas, which is a military-based town, so has a lot of kids from elsewhere, and hockey is a great way they all unite. Unfortunately, they did not get to do a 4-day weekend like we did. They had an afternoon in the game. As of this year, Craft Hockeyville USA has not restarted. They are running it in Canada. This is the 18th year, but there seems to be no push to bring it back to the United States as of yet. And, you know, which is really sad, because we thought, oh, we're gonna be in this legacy of Hockeyvilles, and we may be just one of 6 communities in the United States to ever win it, which is, you know, out there. So thinking, you know, in Canada, it's still current, here not so much. So, you know, our moment was our moment, and now looking back, I think we really embrace that, because otherwise we wouldn't have had a chance to do it. Unlike the DRI. So there we were, and I remember this conversation with Jackie Walters when we wanted to get more money for the arena. What you might not know is there was a check for $150,000. They gave us a big check. But to prepare the Clinton Arena for the game, they probably spent another $350,000. The netting, the plexiglass, the locker room, the entire sound system, internet capability, I'm forgetting some stuff. The NHL gave us that in addition, so they could have the game here. So when we say what did they get, you know, we're really talking about $500,000 that they put into that. Still wasn't enough. You know, that facility desperately needs a girls' locker room and some other improvements. So we started, you know, fresh off our national win, well, what can we do? And we heard about this state program called the DRI, the Downtown Revitalization Initiative Grant. And we thought, if we can win a national contest, we should be able to win something in the state. And so in 2019, we decided to try this. And the DRI is a governor's initiative. So it's, you know, Governor Cuomo started it, Governor Hochul has continued it. So it could end if we get a governor who says they don't want that priority. It's a great program. It provides $10 million to 10 communities around the state every year. And the idea is to give you that kind of money so that the impact is significant, so that it's huge, so it's not just one thing. And that's what we liked about it, is we're like, oh, we could do the arena, we could do the pool, we could do the KSU, we could do, you know. And we thought, this is what we want to do. So it took us 3 years. Every year I thought we were going to win. Every year I was crushed, except for the last year, of course. But it took us 3 years, and we got better. And so when I look back and see, well, how did you get it? I think Clinton Hospitality did it again. Okay? So the first year we went, Steve Bologna, Jackie and I were chosen as I said, we were the most of the people not in the room when they voted. Our committee voted to go and do the presentation to the state. And so you don't know what that's like. All they say is you do a presentation, and you can ask, I'd say, well, should we do a PowerPoint? Should we, whatever you want. Okay, well, you're not helping very much. So I asked someone, I said, well, do they bring gifts? Bribes, gifts. And someone said, a small gift would be appropriate. So we got, the first year we brought hockey pucks that said Hockeyville. And the second year with the pandemic, it was virtual. But 2022 when we went, and this time it was Mike DeBragio, Elizabeth Tantillo, and I who had been the 2022 presenters. And I kept saying, you know, maybe you want to ditch me because we're not winning and I'm, you know. And I said, no. So we brought, it originally had been in May, and then they moved it to the fall. So we brought Ciderville donuts and cider. And they were very appreciative. We were the last group to go, and so as we were leaving, I said, is it appropriate, would it be all right if we brought some cider and donuts for you? And they're like, oh yeah, and somebody made a joke about spiking it with something, like, oh, we didn't think of that, but we could run out if that would help. But I don't think that's the hospitality that got us there. You know, I told this story during the presentation in 2022. And because the question I got asked was, you guys have been here, this is your third time, you're not winning. Why is your community still so enthusiastic? And I said, because here's why. I said, in March 2019, Jackie and I sent out about 60 emails. We said, we want to talk about this state program that we might get the community to be part of. And we've all been involved in meetings and things like this, and we know how it goes, right? Like, you send out 60, you're like, maybe we'll get 12. I'd be happy with 10, but we're probably gonna get 8. And we said, okay, well, we'll see how it goes. We had 41 people representing 50 groups, organizations, and businesses in the room. And Jackie and I, yeah, this is great. So we had a little PowerPoint. We did, Jackie put it together. I do, what is a DRI? What do you do? How do you win it? And so it was a fairly short presentation. I said, thank you all for coming. You know, please, we want to meet in 2 weeks. You all have homework to go out to your groups and find out the big wish list projects. This isn't we need new windows, but the big wish list stuff. And I said, again, thank you, and hope to see you in 2 weeks. And I turned to help Jackie with the presentation. And she goes, well, I think it went well, and I do too. And then we realized that the room was really loud. Everybody was talking to each other. And we kept hearing people say, your group wants to do that? We had that idea. That's an awesome idea. Maybe we can work together. A couple people came up to us, but really it was talking to each other. And I'm like, oh, you guys can leave now. They're like, no, they stayed for another hour. And I think that did it. You know, that enthusiasm really kept. And I remember saying to the committee, I said, sure, if the day ever comes where when we don't get the response, then we won't be back here. But people believe in this, you know, this program. And I said, we're gonna win at some point. So, now it's about the DRI. Well, like the Burns brothers showed us, details matter, okay? We had to come up with a catchphrase for the community. Jen Waters and I were both back and forth, and we kept going, yeah, it's a small town, but we have so much great diversity here because of the college and such, and she goes, yeah, it's friendly, but there's so much to do, and we're like, we gotta narrow this down. And we just kept going back and forth, and I was on my indoor rower one morning, and thinking about, how do we narrow this down, and it came to me, and I got right off the road, I called her, I said, I got it. Community of everyone, for everyone. And we thought those words, 6 words, capture what Clinton is. Okay. You wouldn't believe the amount of time Mike DeBragio spent on editing our applications, to where at one point on a Saturday night, that I answered this email and Mike sent it, shows the exciting lives we both live. He said, do you think there should be a dash or a hyphen here? I don't know. So, and rehearsals for the presentations. The second year, and this is one of my favorite stories, the second year was virtual, and we did it at Clinton Central School in Steve Grimm's office, because Elizabeth, Mike, and I are not tech people. Steve is. But the rules are very clear. You can only have your presenters in the room. Mike actually was not in the room with us. His brother-in-law was being sworn in as president of a college in Pennsylvania, and Ann was like, oh no, you're not missing that. So Mike was in his brother-in-law's office with this fabulous bookcase behind him, and Elizabeth and I are in Steve's office with like pictures of his kids behind us. So it's virtual. By then we were all tired of virtual. And so we're getting on, and we think there's gonna be a little chit chat, a little hi, how are you? We sign on, and the presenter says, go. Elizabeth and I couldn't figure out what button to hit to start our presentation. So Mike, fortunately, was going first, and we're like, what do we do? Steve Grimm, God love him, gets on the floor and army crawls over to behind us. Now, we can see ourselves on the laptop. And he kept going, am I in the video? No, you're good. And he goes, all right. He goes, put your hand down. So I had my hands up. He goes, put your hand down. He goes, I'm going to pretend this is your hand. And so this hand kind of comes out. Like, not wearing the same sweater that I'm wearing either. And he hits a button, and all of a sudden the presentation comes out. And then he belly crawls back over to us. And so I think that, fortunately, I don't think they can take that away from us now. But, with Hockeyville, I can't say I knew we were going to win, but I knew we were going to not be outworked. And it came early on. It came when, so you have to submit all your stories, and then there's a deadline, and then there's nothing that happens for 3 weeks, and they announced the final 4. So the deadline came, and it was at noon on a Friday. And at 12:30, Andy and I sent out this email to what became our group and said, okay, everyone, we're done. We've done as much as we can. We're now going to spend, John, you remember this, the next 3 weeks assuming we're in the final 4 and we're coming up with a plan. What are we going to do for the 2 weeks before we can vote? And we sent it to about 20 people. Nobody said, what a waste of time, or let's wait, or Everybody started shooting ideas out. In that 3 weeks, it allowed us to weed out the okay ideas from the great ideas, to realize what would not work, even though it sounded like a great idea. There was an idea of, we had talked about doing an overnight thing at the arena for voting, and then realizing who's going to watch the kids, and people said, we're not going to do that. So I knew then, I said, we may not win this, but nobody's going to outwork us. And with the DRI, as I said, we were not tech people. So when we went in 2022, it was at Herkimer Community College, and there was a stage. And Elizabeth and I both were still recovering from falls, bad falls we had taken. And we said the most harrowing part of this whole presentation was we both had to walk up the stage without a handrail. And there was just a line of chairs on there, like, oh, thank gosh we didn't do a presentation, because we would have been, it would have been behind us, and we would have been in the way. So we just stood at the podium, what's I am doing here, and we talked. And I was second. And we had rehearsed so much that when Mike was talking, I was looking at mine, I said, oh my gosh, he says that, Elizabeth says it, I'm just skipping that paragraph right out. But toward the end of mine, I made a little joke, because I think humor is important. Okay? And I said, if you're tired of seeing us, just give us $10 million and we'll go away. And they laughed like that, and I thought, they're listening to us, they're hearing us. And as we drove back, we said, as Elizabeth was driving, and we were all like, oh, we got through that, and said, I think they heard us this time. So it was still a wonderful moment when we were in Cooperstown, because they only told us to go to Cooperstown to hear we were an award, and I kept saying, I can't fake smile if it's 4 minutes, only $2.5 million, we won the 10. But of course we won the big one, and what it's gonna do is amazing. And the last story about DRI, perhaps, is that Clinton Kirkland rewrote How You Do It books. Hard to believe. So, of course, the arena is in the town. But when we were looking at the projects, we thought, well, we want to do the town and the village. And I kept reading the application. I said, well, there's nothing here that says two communities can't do it together. I had looked at all the winning ones before. I said, oh, nobody's ever done it, but it doesn't say you can't. And then we said, well, maybe we better figure that out. So we asked Empire State Development, Mohawk Valley, and the regional office, they said, well, no one's ever done it, but it doesn't say you can, but we better check. We had to get the governor, at the time Governor Cuomo, to say, yeah, why not? To let us know that we could do it. Okay. Now, it's a full paragraph in the application process that encourages communities to work together to do one of these. But the thing that I think is most telling, that when we look back, that we should be really proud about, we have been the only community to win that did it with all volunteers. And I know that the mayors of Clinton and Bob Meelan, the supervisor of town, get paid, but nowhere near what they should get. Other communities hired groups or had, like Utica and Rome, planning departments where people did it as part of their job. And that was one of the things when we went back after we didn't win the second year. And I said, our feelings will, they give you some feedback if you want it. I said, our feelings will not be hurt. If we're coming up short because we're not professionals, you tell us and we'll see what we can do. And they said, come back one more year. One of the cities that won it in 2022 had spent over $1 million over 6 years to win. And we kept saying, we don't know what the professionals are doing in there. And they said, you guys are great. So the first community to win a DRI with volunteers. And after we won, we had some questions from other communities that have come up short and said, what did you do? And we said, we'd be happy to help you. You can do this. So, I think that we're, some things that we should be proud about that. Historical Society, I hope in the next year you are out there taking photos of everything, right? How things look. Because as I'm standing here today, I'm telling you in 2027, it is going to look entirely different out there. Okay? That's what a DRI does. We're looking at an expanded Kirkland Art Center. We're looking at a pool that will no longer leak gallons of water every day, but we will have also a renovated clubhouse that's accessible for everybody. We're looking at a revamped Kirkland Town Library space. We're looking at a cider mill It's going to be able to take bus tours, serve food, and one of my personal favorites, offer hard cider. We are looking at least 80 new places to live in this community with the apartments that will go in. We are looking at the Kirkland Trails. They've done an amazing job on their own, bringing that trail, expanding it north to someday hook up with the Erie Canal Trail. We're looking at public bathrooms when you go to an event on the Village Green, which may be the most important thing that people are going to find out there. And we're going to look at a Village Green that's going to look very different from what it does today. Okay. There are other things that are going to come. Okay. I didn't even mention the Clinton Arena that's finally going to get the girls' locker room it so badly needs. Okay. It's going to be different. And there are a few times in history, if you're part of the Historical Society, you have a love of history. We're at a time in Clinton Kirkland right now where we can stop and say, we know the before and we know the after. And it's going to be so different. And the after is what's going to be interesting, because they're going to be, little kids who aren't going to remember what the Village Green looks like. Little girls are going to change in the new locker room in the Clinton Arena and not understand that before they had to get dressed in their car because there was no place for them to go. So we're really at a great time here. And for me, owner of the paper, that's great, because it's going to give us something to write about for years to come. We're a small community paper. I would say 100% most weeks. Our news is what we choose. I almost use the word created, but then I thought, well, people are going to think that's fake news. But no, what we choose. The meetings, the events, the sports we go to for a particular week. We don't have a lot of what, in my business, we call breaking news, other people call bad news. We don't have we don't have fires. We don't have crime, like that. When I used to work at the OD and when I worked at Syracuse Papers, our cops reporter would come in every day, not knowing what they were going to do, but confident that there'd be something going on in the city that would require a story. So we don't often have the unexpected, except one day in December, 2016, when I learned that my wedding anniversary and Zach's birthday are a day apart. I learned that because it was a Saturday night, and both of us had dinner plans, not with each other, but with other people, and got a call. I got a call from someone in Oriskany Falls who said, the mill's on fire. And it was a lot like the old Mill and Clark Mills, just a big, empty building. And I said, well, what do you mean on fire? And he said, on fire, like fire. And I said, bad enough that we had just gotten to the restaurant. I said, to not go to dinner? He goes, oh yeah. So I called Zach, and Zach said, where in Oriskany Falls? I said, I don't know, follow the glow, because it sounds like we're gonna find this fire pretty easy. And you got just a little bit south of Deansboro, and you could see, it looked like the sun was coming up. I mean, that's how bad the fire was. And so there we are, both of us dressed very nicely, but not for a fire. I had dress shoes on and thin slacks. It was colder than it is today. It was about, 6, 7 o'clock at night? Yeah. It was well below freezing. So Zach's taking pictures, I'm trying to write, and the mill, it's just, but nobody really could pay attention to us. We were probably getting a little close. It was very cold, so when I get too cold, I just would go up a little closer to the fire, and I'd warm up, and then I'd go back. And I think one of the thing I'll never forget, so water, of course, freezes, and there were millions of gallons of water shooting out from fire trucks all over the place. And as soon as it hit the ground, it froze. I was on a little patch of a snowbank in a parking lot. And I looked around, and it seemed like it was sheer ice. And I thought, I can't move. One of the firemen came, and he had his boots on, and he goes, well, we might both go down, but grab my coat. He goes, and Russ Petrie, and he literally skated with me holding onto his fire coat. He skated me over to where it wasn't so icy. It was pretty intense. Zach, tell about the pictures you took.
Well, I focused a lot on the Clinton Fire Department. They were there in full force.
Yeah.
And,
They had the aerial.
Right, they had the aerial. That was a lot of the photos. But again, very hot, very big fire.
And so what's interesting is that they're all volunteers. There must have been, I think there ended up being 16 fire departments there and Saturday, 2 weeks before Christmas they came. And nobody really paid, I think the only media people there, we're the only other people there. And there was, no one really paid attention to us. And you learn not to get in the way, but there was a wire down across one of the roads, and I remember Zach and I like, you think that's live? I don't know. Maybe we should go around. What do we do? But it's probably one of the biggest stories, in terms of news happening that we've covered, and I don't think we've had anything since. The alarms go off, and we always check, but fortunately, we have not had a lot of what we call bad news in our communities that we have to rush out or uncover or change up the papers there. So those are my stories. If you have questions or comments, let's see what I can answer. I don't know if I left anything out.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
For the library, are they going to add a section where they have a music library, the Kirkland Town Library, or you don't know what they're going to do? Are they going to add it?
I know that they're, so when they looked at their space, they realized that the upstairs has that community room area, but that it's out of the way. You kind of have to know there's an upstairs to go to an exhibit and such. So they're sort of flipping things. They're going to put their offices and non-public spaces upstairs, and they're going to redesign the bottom of it. But in terms of what they might be adding, I think they're still working that out. Now, I should add that the list has been sent to the governor, and she will make an announcement, I think maybe March or April, that says here's exactly what the projects will be. And so the projects that were sent in total about $14.5 million. I think we're only getting 10. What will happen is that they will look for other funding. There's, like the arena, for example, will qualify for both Parks and Rec funding and historical funding. So they may take some of that and say, this chunk's gonna come from Parks and Rec, so the DRI ask is lower so that we can get to the 10 million. So when the governor will come here and make an announcement of what's actually in the projects.
Yes. What will the reconfiguration of the village park look like?
They have I've seen the blueprints, so they're going to make the walkway, kind of like almost a 90-degree turn, so that the walkways aren't going out onto 12B as much. And they're going to take the outer edge along 12B over by the light and make a more of a walkway, because what they're finding that it was dangerous to go if you're up by the light over by the coffee shop, that you go from there across the street and then cross over. And they were finding that people were trying to cross in front of the church. So they want to make that safer. They're going to move, of course, the biggest thing is the parking lot that is, I call it the NBT parking lot because I use it to go to the bank, but the parking lot that's used by the village there, there's about 20 spaces there, that little parking lot. That's gone. That will become green. That'll be, the park will extend up there. So that little cutaway will be gone. And so the parking lot will become green, will be part of the park. And that will then help people use the bathrooms that are gonna be in Lombard Hall. So they're going to move the war monuments. I'm not sure there's exactly where all that's gonna go. The gazebo might move, so because the center of the park is going to change. And looking at adding some trees and maybe some hedges to prevent people from crossing where it's not safe. But it's gonna look very different. I know they've talked about, and again, they have to make sure that actually look at the money, but whether the fountain is going to be moved or if that's going to stay. I think they're thinking that may stay because it's a big expense to try to move it.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Lombard Hall, where there are offices, you said some people could have access to the Lombard Hall's bathrooms. Right now, I think there's only one. Are they going to add bathrooms to
Yes.
that building? Okay.
Yeah, one of the, when you look at what the community needs, I mean, when we did Hockeyville, we had to bring in porta potties because, you have all these people at an event and there's nowhere for them to go. So, Lombard Hall the front will be redone to become accessible to anybody. And there'll be bathrooms put in that will be up front enough, or I think it's gonna be an addition, so that when there's like the farmer's market, people, they'll be open, or whenever there's something, an event going on, people will be available. So they're gonna be added to it.
Real quick,
Yeah.
there's a missing piece that you haven't talked about yet. I'm Nick Burns, Andy and Dave's brother, and I wasn't involved in the Prettyman and Hockeyville to the extent that they were by any means. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know who was in charge. I did do a little social media, I will say that did help a bit. So after it was over, Andy and I were talking on the phone, and he was sort of distilling all that had happened, and he tried to describe to me kind of one of the most important things, I guess, on his mind at the time. He said, you know what? None of this would have happened without Patty Louise.
Oh.